NECN, honored as News Station of the Year by the Associated Press.
The Boston Archdiocese today handed over new documents in the case of alleged pedophile Father Paul Shanley.
Documents released earlier showed church officials knew of abuse allegations against Shanley for years and did not report him. The new documents go even further. NECN's Lauren Madelon has details.
Well, we know that Paul Shanley was given extensive financial support.
Attorney Eric McLeish says he should have received all the documents from the Boston Archdiocese following an April 3rd court order that the Archdiocese hand over what it had on Father Paul Shanley.
These are the writings of a perverted monster.
Chief among the newly released documents, a diary written by Shanley. He talks openly about his homosexuality, his predilection for young boys, and the fact that he has venereal disease. Also, a warning is contained in the new documents written by one of the members of a prominent Catholic family here in New England, warning the Archdiocese that Shanley was taking the wrong approach in dealing with youth. There's also a copy of a 1979 draft of a letter for then Cardinal Medeiros to sign, a letter that strongly suggests Shanley was trying to blackmail the diocese by threatening to expose misconduct at the seminary in Boston.
We had more warnings about it in 1977, 1979, 1983, 1982, and what happened? I mean, this is beyond covering things up.
It is the most twisted story. If I read it, I wouldn't believe it. But this is the church, and it goes beyond religion. It's a very simple concept which we were all brought up to believe. It's right or it's wrong.
Now that he's seen the documents, Eric McLeish plans to depose 3 senior members of the Archdiocese. Ultimately, he says he hopes to depose the Cardinal himself. Lauren Madelon, NECN, Boston.
With new policies, can the Catholic Church heal the victims of sexual abuse?
2 guests are here to give us their views now. Carolyn Newberger is a child psychologist. She's been a leading researcher in the field of children's disclosures of sexual abuse. And Phil Saviano is with the group SNAP, the survivor network of those abused by priests. Thanks to both of you being here tonight. Thanks. Carolyn, what would you say about what you heard coming out of the summit in Rome? Does it sound as though the church is on the right track when it comes to dealing with these problems?
Well, they're on the right track in that they are finally acknowledging that they have problems. They're on the right track in that they're saying that these problems are a crime. I am still very troubled by the church and the church's response. I mean, who is determining what is notorious? Who is determining what is serial? What is guilt? It sounds as though the church still wants to retain its own prerogatives in making these sorts of determinations. They are not talking about universally requiring reporting of priests to the civil authorities. And they're really not talking about the victims. So, for example, they talk about repeated abuse or serial abuse. Well, most children don't disclose their abuse. So how do they know that if one case comes out, that this isn't a case in which there may be many other children who have been abused? They don't know that. And they can't be guarding their own hen house.
Phil, do you at least take some comfort in the fact that that at least the Vatican now has a picture of the problem in the United States that they perhaps hadn't had before this summit meeting in Rome these past couple of days?
No. The short answer is no. I think that the picture has always been there, whether they're aware of it or not. It doesn't seem to make much difference. It's very disturbing to me that this group of among the most powerful people in the church, the Pope and the American cardinals, had these 2 days of intensive meetings, and what do we have to show for it? The only thing that seems that they could agree on is the fact that the Pope says, well, yes, sexual molestation of children is indeed a crime and should be treated that way. But where are the provisions that are going to help us to put a stop to it in the future?
Well, hopefully they're going to be discussed at this meeting in Dallas. This is supposed to have been sort of a framework for
Yeah,
that
but
meeting.
even the most simple decision as to whether to remove a priest from the organization if he has has molested one child or if he's molested 12 or 15. It seems to me that both of these men are sexual predators. There shouldn't be any question that there's no place in the priesthood for either of them. And if they can't agree on something like that, how can we expect a group of over 190 bishops in Dallas to come up with a consensus themselves? It's a much larger group.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'm wondering, now they seem to approach this saying that there was a difference between the pedophiles or the priests who would abuse very young children as to those who would have some sort of sexual relations with young teenagers to, 15, 14-year-old or something like that. Is there a difference in the kind of person who would do that, what their problem might be, or how treatable it is?
Well, I'm not sure that that's the right question. I feel that the right question is, are children being exploited? What's happening to these children? And whether we label it as pedophilia or we label it as homosexuals who want to prey on children, I think is beside the point. I think what the church is failing to do is to take a child-centered perspective and to say what matters is that children are being abused.
Right.
It doesn't matter what we call it.
I think what they're looking at, though, is could this priest ever be put back in service, if you will? Is it possible to remove that person from the situation because they're hurting children? Are they treatable? Is it fixable?
Listen,
Well, go on.
Let me interrupt you. If one of these cardinals had a 14-year-old daughter that was raped by a priest, there wouldn't be any discussion here. They would say, absolutely, this guy has no place in the priesthood. They don't have children. Maybe that's part of the problem. They can't quite understand what it might be like to have a child and watch that child go through such a horrific experience. The other thing is if a man is capable of doing this once, he's capable of doing it again. And for them to take any chances whatsoever, it seems to me that what they're doing, once again, is protecting the institution at the expense of an innocent child.
Carolyn, as a psychologist, would you agree with that assessment?
That they're protecting the institution?
Well,
yes.
no, I understand that. I know where you're coming from here. But the idea that it's just one episode and that's enough and they are really untreatable and they should just be removed.
I don't think it's a question of whether an individual is treatable or not treatable. The question is there a chance that another child can become a victim? And you always have to say, yes, if someone has abused a child once, there's an extremely high likelihood that they're going to abuse a child again,
But
whether it's a
Carolyn,
younger child or an older child. And we do know that people who prey on children, that pedophilia, whether it's younger children, pedophiles have different people will have different windows of children, different sexes of children, different age groups of children that might stimulate their fantasies and that might be the children that they select to abuse. And so I don't have a particular age cutoff that says, okay, now this is pedophilia and this is something else. It's all pedophilia. Any child who is under the age of 17 who is sexually molested is in a situation, is in an abuse of power, is in an abusive situation.
But the church hierarchy has pointed to your profession, psychology, psychiatry, as saying, one of the reasons we reassign these guys is because we sent them for treatment. We were told they can be treated, they could be cured, and they won't offend anymore. So, how, is there any treatment or cure for?
I think that the idea of treatment and cure is a wonderful one, and I hope that someday we can find it. But right now, the success rate is very low.
Okay, I just wanted to get that on the record because it was one of the things our previous guest was talking about.
Absolutely. And here's the other important point. It doesn't matter whether it's treatable or not. It's a crime. It ought to be treated as a crime. It ought to be reported to civil authorities. And that's why they got themselves into this situation to begin with. They treated it as a moral lapse instead of a crime.
Now that the Pope has made that very clear, though, do you have any hope that at least current cases or things that would be happening, in the last number of years would be treated differently by law enforcement authorities and psychologists who can look at this individual then and determine what should happen to them?
Well, I think that civil authorities are looking at this differently. For example, they're calling me up for advice and information. That has never happened before. But the point is I believe it's we're going to have to rely on civil authorities, prosecutors, and police to put a stop to this, because I don't think that we can trust the church officials to figure it out on their own.
No, maybe we made a mistake, though, years ago, as I said earlier. Rather than reporting it to the parish priest, the parents then should have gone to the police and then, of course, reported.
Or done both, at least done both.
Or done both, yeah. But why didn't that happen? I mean, I can understand some of it. You didn't challenge the authority of the church. And
Well, in some cases, perhaps it did, but
I think that, I'm sorry, I think that maybe Catholics were worried about jeopardizing what they saw as their fast track to salvation
and
by
people,
turning in a priest. So
people love their churches. People's lives are very often centered in their churches or in their synagogues. They have beliefs that these institutions nourish. This is very important in people's lives. Plus, the church is an institution that says, we are the ones whom you can trust. We are the ones who have the authority for determining the moral good. And they had every right and reason to expect that the church would respond appropriately, and they didn't.
Do you feel any better now that this has reached the level of the Pope, that it has that kind of notoriety? As somebody was saying just today, these happened in the sacristies and different places, you know, in hiding, and now all of a sudden it is an international issue.
clearly their feet are being held to the fire, and something good has to come from that ultimately. But I have to say I was really disappointed in the results of the two days of conferences. I was expecting a little bit more. I mean, I was encouraged initially by the Pope's statement, you know, it's a crime and there's no place within the priesthood. Yeah, that's a pretty strong stand. But it's one thing to make a statement, it's another thing to tell people how we're going to carry it out. And that's what we're waiting for.
Well, I think he's got them on warning. That's some of the things he expects to be done in Dallas. And let's see what happens after that conference.
Okay. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Newsnight right after this.
One bishop has resigned. Dozens of priests have been removed, all because of the scandal of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. At the end of the Vatican summit, the American cardinals failed to reach agreement on a one-strike-you're-out policy for priests who abuse children. The cardinals were divided over whether all abusive priests should be defrocked or only serial abusers. Back with our guests, and let's start with Carolyn. You had a meeting with Cardinal Law. When and what did you discuss?
I met with Cardinal Law in May of 1993 at Cardinal Law's invitation, along with my husband, Eli Newberger, and two psychiatrists, Carol and Ted Nadelson. Cardinal Law, this was right after the Father Porter case. There were about 9 other clergy present, including Bishop Murphy and Bishop McCormick, who is now the bishop in New Hampshire. They wanted to talk to us about the Father Porter case and about pedophilia and what we knew and what we advised. And what we told them was that these cases are likely to be repeated again and again and again, that most cases of pedophilia, sometimes victims run into the hundreds. We told them that they should be reported to civil authorities. That's the only way that you can be sure that they are going to be handled appropriately. We basically gave him a 2-hour course in pedophilia. And I feel very angry because I'm asking myself the question, what was that about? Why was nothing done? Why is it coming out now? It's coming out now, not because the church has finally seen the light, but because the church has been profoundly embarrassed. And so they have no choice now but to respond to a public outcry at the revelations of all of these children who have been abused over time.
What did they say to you then, Carolyn?
They thanked us very much and sent us home. And we offered to be helpful in the future, but there was nothing more to be said. And I don't, I can't speak for what their reaction was. I can only assume that they were not happy with the message.
When you had your meeting with them, did you have any idea that the problem was as serious as it's turned out to be?
I knew that there is a serious problem in the church because we had knowledge of the Father Porter case, and we had been involved in teaching a course in which people came and spoke who had been involved in that case. I've been involved in cases, as well as my husband, that have involved clergy abuse. And so we knew it was a problem, which was why we were so glad to have a chance to meet with the Cardinal and to be so clear with the Cardinal about how serious this problem is and how devastating it is for children and for their families.
That's what I want to ask Phil. I've been wanting to ask you this question because so many times in this I hear it described, the pain that this causes, as ruining someone's life. And not that I diminish in any way what it causes and the pain it causes, but hearing that over and over again, this ruins your life, doesn't that make it worse?
Doesn't what
to have it described by other people, of saying that this sort of abuse ruined your life. I mean, does that, or is that just an accurate depiction?
You mean if you're a victim,
Yes.
does it make it worse?
No, how about perpetuating the victim status?
You know, in the survivors, actually, there's the terms. We always say that there's a difference between a victim and a survivor. And victims are people that are, we think they're sort of stuck with their pain and they haven't quite figured out a way to work it through. It's true that this affects, the thing that I feel is that nobody gets out of this unscathed. No matter whether it was just a one-time thing or whether you were 6 years old or you were 16, it's going to have lasting consequences. It's hard to predict in any particular child how tough it's going to be. But the fact of the matter is I hear from people all the time whose lives have been ruined, who at a very young age feel such a sense of betrayal or embarrassment or emotional pain that they start seeking ways to deaden the pain, and whether that's through becoming a workaholic or becoming an alcoholic. It's a similar sort of escape. And they get on these paths in their lives at a young age, and it's not until they're in their 30s or their 40s that it really hits them and their life starts to fall apart. And curiously enough, that's often when I start to hear from them. Once they've gone through, rehab, whichever form it takes, and once they start dealing with the childhood experience, that's when they want to start reaching out to other survivors, and that's when they get the courage to come forward. And it's at that point that their life starts the road to healing.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Appreciate it so much. Carolyn Newberger and Phil Saviano.
Coming up, we'll have a preview of tomorrow's Newsnight.